Hello and a warm welcome to Heart and Soul Broadcasting Services. My name is Lynette Manzini. I would like to welcome you to this sixth dialogue series brought to you by Civio Institute. And the theme of this series is Vision 2030. Today being the first out of the six, the first webinar is entitled The Need for a Vision Process. At this moment in time, allow me to call upon Belinda Chahora. She is with the Civio Institute. She is our facilitator for the day. Belinda, the virtual podium is yours.
Thank you so much, Lynette, and thank you so much for giving me that introduction. So if you're joining us today, welcome. This, as Lynette has said, this is the first dialogue in a series of 6 on Zimbabwe's aspiration to become an upper middle income economy by 2030, also known as Zimbabwe's Vision 2030. As Lynette said, my name is Belinda Chahora. I'm going to be facilitating today's meeting. And just so that you're aware, we are streaming this meeting on 4 platforms. We are streaming it on Zoom. So if you're in the Zoom room, welcome, you made it. We're also streaming it on the Civio Institute Facebook page, on Heart and Soul TV Facebook page, and on Newsday Zimbabwe Facebook pages. So on all of these platforms, throughout the meeting, we're going to be taking questions as our speakers are presenting. So please feel free to type your questions into the chat platform if you're on Zoom, or into the comment section if you are on the Facebook pages. And we're going to continue with our program now. So like I said, my name is Belinda Chahora. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the first in a series of 6 dialogues that we are hosting at Civio Institute on Vision 2030. And the dialogue for today is holding the title, The Need for a Vision Process. We want to talk about why do we need a vision process to get us to Vision 2030 as a country, as an economy. So welcome once again. And the objectives of this dialogue is to develop a secure consensus on what it's going to take to achieve an upper middle income economy by 2030. We want to foster a culture of collaboration and co-production amongst different stakeholders for the achievement of Vision 2030. And we as citizens want to agree on the process of mutual accountability between state and non-state actors. So that's why we're hosting these dialogues. And we're hoping that in this series of 6, we are going to create momentum and conversations around Vision 2030 and start to talk about how as citizens we can get involved in that process. A number of hashtags are working for this dialogue series. The first one is hashtag towards an inclusive society, hashtag Vision 2030, hashtag catalyzing Vision 2030, and then hashtag Zim Vision 2030. So you can use any of those hashtags to stay connected to the conversation. We've got snippets that are going to be going out on social media throughout the whole day. Now I'm going to go and outline our agenda quickly and just give you a rundown of what you can expect in today's dialogue. Our speakers for today in this order are going to be the Executive Director of Civio Institute, Tendai Marisa, is going to give us a short overview of why we need a vision process. We are going to then go into some sectoral insights on Vision 2030. Some key groups are going to come represented by the individuals I'll mention, and they're going to be talking about what Vision 2030 will mean to each of those groups. We've got a representation from the church through Bishop Muparutsa. We've got representation from the youth by Nicolatte Matuku. And we've got representation from Labour, represented by Dr. Godfrey Kanyenze. We're going to then share experiences from other countries. And for that, we are going to have Dr. Stephen Brian, who is from Legatum Institute. And he's going to be talking to us about how other countries have gone through an envisioning process. And then we are going to open our dialogue to the floor. So everybody who is present, you'll get an opportunity to ask your question. But how we're going to do that is we're going to be posting our questions into the chat platform. So no one will be able to unmute your microphones. We will ask you to post your questions into the chat. So if you've got a question already handy, please post it into the chat even now. We'll be compiling those and we'll have an opportunity for our panelists to answer your questions once you've asked them. Now, let's start with why we need an envisioning process. And to give us that background, I'd like to invite Dr. Tendai Murisa. Now, I'll give a quick introduction of him. Tendai Murisa is passionate about Africa, and he's passionate about searching for answers and solutions to take the continent forward. His key area of research focus is on citizens' agency, solidarity, philanthropy, public policy, land and agrarian reform. So he's written a number of books around each of those different subjects or co-authored books around those. He founded a Severe Institute in 2018, and the main goal for Severe Institute being a quest for an inclusive society. So some of the key books that he's authored or co-authored are Whose Development, Beyond the Crisis, Land Struggles, and Civil Society in Southern Africa. So Dr. Tendai Murisa, I would like to invite you to talk to us about why we need a vision process in Zimbabwe.
Good morning, fellow Zimbabweans, comrades and friends from within Zimbabwe, spread across the diaspora, and also those who are traveling in some way at an airport waiting to board the next flight to somewhere. Welcome to this conversation, and thanks Belinda and also to the Heart and Soul team that is working behind the scenes to make sure that we've got as much reach as we could. So let's start off by just for my level of comfort, let's start off by disrupting the aspiration that is on the table. Zimbabwe, the government of Zimbabwe's aspiration is towards an upper middle income economy. Our aspiration at Civio, and together with partners that we work with, is towards an inclusive upper middle income economy. And that is the two are very different. It's already different visions. Upper middle income is measured by certain abstract terms such as GDP, etc., GNI, etc. But for us, we recognize even the challenges to do with GDP in terms of just measuring. So we are pushing for a process that at the end of the day acknowledges the need for a broader framework of measuring when you say a country is now an upper middle income country. Access to health, improved access to health that is equitable, improved access to education, improved prospects for employment for our youths that are studying, etc., and also a peaceful country. That is just one way of looking at it. But already what we're doing when we do that, we are already broadening the kind of work that is before us. So let's start off by saying one of the things that why we are having these conversations led by Civio Institute and the partners that we're working with. Number one is since 2018, when the government launched its Vision 2030 document, we are yet to see non-state platforms, platforms organized by organizations that are not government related, are running on this theme. It tells you something. It tells you that we have a problem around the ownership of the vision itself. It remains a vision of government. It's yet to become a vision of Zimbabwe. And the two are different. Us as Zimbabweans, we are yet to maybe buy into the vision process. And it tells you something that is a challenge to do with the process itself. So to every process, to every forward-looking process, a vision process, a strategy, there are two critical pillars that we need to consider. The first one is the process itself. Then the final part is the substance of that, of the product you produce. At the moment and today, we are going to focus on the process itself. So for us, we have flagged some challenges with the existing document or framework or aspiration. Already I've said that it needs to be broadened, or there needs to be a caveat to say it has to be an inclusive upper middle income. And we can explain what it means through writings and different presentations, what that inclusive means. But the current challenge that we have is to do with the process itself. Number one, what we have seen, and this is not just isolated to the Vision 2030 document, it is actually the culture of governance in our country. the technocratic expert-led processes where overnight we wake up to a policy document. We've seen this quite a number of times. And even, so this was even before the current regime, and even with this regime, the culture continues. We woke up to a transitional stabilization, transitional stabilization process document. Then we woke up to NDS1 with very limited platforms for co-creation, co-design, and collaboration in terms of exactly scoping of needs, et cetera, et cetera. So that number one, that's the challenge. The technocratic expert-led processes are a huge challenge. Then number two is related to the technocratic. The moment you do things being led by, I always say that the people who design our policies in government, they do not fill one bus for the whole country. The whole bus, just one bus, it won't fill up. That's how narrow the space of policy making is in Zimbabwe. So it has led also to what we call limited buy-in. There are very few conversations, like I've already mentioned. There are very few platforms dedicated towards saying, how do we make Vision 2030 a reality outside of government organized meetings? While the vision is really about all of us, not just about government. Then fellow non-state actors who are in the same sort of sector like us are unsure or have limited knowledge about what is going on. It's a black box. We are not very sure of what government is doing. So at the end of the day, what we see is we see the launch of a document, then we see certain public events, either organized by government or launching something, then there's the link with Vision 2030. But there's no clear, even the coordinating framework around saying, this is the coordinating agency to take us towards the realization of Vision 2030. And in the process, we fall into the usual traps of government policy making, whereby we celebrate the launch of a policy, but we do not give it fit so that it can actually accomplish what is written in that document. So that's the challenge. Then the final challenge is the polarization in our country. It's a partisan-based form of polarization, and it makes it difficult to articulate or promote a non-partisan but national vision. So for now, the Vision 2030 document is associated with a certain political party. It's yet to become, and it has to be, it has to become a national process. But because of the polarization in our country, being seen, like we're doing right now, being seen to be organizing anything that has got a terminology to do with Vision 2030 may be seen by others as if we're endorsing a certain political party. That's the challenge of our country. That's the partisanship that we have to deal with. So these are the things that we're saying, that if we're going to discuss a national vision, we have to know that it is beyond partisan interests. There's something called Project Zimbabwe, which is neither ZANU-PF nor MDC, but it is about Zimbabwe and Zimbabweans. And that's what a vision document or a vision process should be about. Should be about a country, not about political parties. So what is the task for today? The task for us, and we were very deliberate, the initial temptation was to bring in the authors of the Vision 2030 document into this process. But we sort of pushed back and said, maybe towards the end of the 6-part webinar series, we'll bring them in. But for now, we want to make sure that we are bringing in the stakeholders that are affected by the planning, by the plan itself, the stakeholders that are what we call the major constituencies in our country. So we have the church. In the surveys that we have done since 2018 up to now, when we ask about belonging, most of our people, instead of belonging to a political party, belong to a church. 73 to 77% on average over 3-year studies, we've seen that 73 to 77% of our people, and these are representative samples, belong to the church. So we felt like we need, when we're talking about a vision document, we need the church to be represented in this process. Then another constituency that we feel is very important to be part and parcel of this conversation, not only today's conversation, but throughout the 6, there's a thread running in the 6 webinars, is the youth, because we know that our country is bulging in the middle. We've got more young people than the elderly. So we felt like from day one, we need to make sure that the youth are part of this conversation and making a contribution. And better still, we felt like these youth, we also need to make sure that there's a gender face to them. So we made sure, and we're very deliberate, that we brought a dynamic sister who's making waves across the continent in terms of leading Africa's transformation. And it's said that many times people like this do not then get platforms in their own countries. So we made sure that we brought a sister who can help us articulate what it means to be young, to be a young Zimbabwean aspiring for better. Because for those who are writing Vision 2030 documents, they may not be able to see the year 2030 themselves, but these are the youth that will have to deal with either the success or the mess thereof. So we felt like we need to bring in the youth. Then the third constituency that we felt could not be left behind is the constituency to do with labor, because even when you look at it, Zimbabwe, if you look at its social organization, the major component, the drivers, the creators of wealth in this country is the class of is the labor. So we felt like we need the working class to be represented. And I know we should have brought in maybe a trade unionist, but we felt like we need to bring somebody who spent close to 2 decades or 3 decades articulating and helping organize the working class to articulate their vision, to articulate their demands, etc. So that's how we've organized this conversation. So but to answer the question, how can we contribute to the process without being co-opted into a partisan agenda? So we're very clear that there is always a possibility of co-optation or being seen as if we're co-opted, but we want to reiterate our independence and our non-partisanship in this process. Then also in the conversation that we're going to have, was also brought in an international dimension. We've made sure that we bring in an international dimension, because Zimbabwe is not alone in trying to articulate a national vision. So we said, let's bring colleagues that we've been working with for the past year or so at LEDRIZ Institute, who can help us to say, from what they are learning globally about countries that are going through these processes of articulating a vision, what do they put in place to make sure that it is inclusive, to make sure that it is achievable and it is realistic. So we're going to also hear that international dimension around visioning processes. Then also the focus is on what we can do. We are mostly non-state actors in this room today, and we are mostly speaking to each other, and we'll speak also to government. But initially the conversation is about ourselves as a constituency, different communities we represent. What is going to be our contribution? There's always the temptation, and it is right, there's always the temptation to nitpick, to critique what government has put on the table. But beyond that, we believe, like Belinda said, we believe in a process that we call co-production and collaboration and co-design. And the co-production part is we are going to produce, together with government, we're going to produce public goods. So for us at Seville Institute, we have moved from the traditional articulation of democracy for the people, by the people, whatever, government by the people, for the people, whatever. But we have gone to just one statement. Democracy is with the people. So we believe that citizens, us, all of us in our different sort of formations and associational platforms, we have to be a part and parcel of the processes and governance processes, decision-making that is to be done for us to achieve the vision of an inclusive upper middle income economy. So I think this discussion is mostly going to be focused, today's discussion, on the process itself and some content issues that will arise. But for us is to say, if we do not get the process right, we'll not get the buy-in that is required. And the vision will not even be articulated nationally. It will remain owned by those people that cannot fill a bus or by a political party at West. But we want this to be a national vision, that even if there was to be a change of government, the vision would remain. That is our hope and our aspiration. So with those few remarks, I'm excited that we've finally managed to convene and we can move forward with these discussions. And I'll hand back to Belinda, and I'll come back maybe towards the end just to say, what are we learning about all this? Thanks so much, Belinda.
Dr. Melissa, thank you so much for outlining why we need a vision process, and also for just explaining why we chose some of the representatives, sectoral representatives that we've got here today. So I'm going to move quickly into our first presentation. And as you know, a number of people in Zimbabwe claim to be Christians. So I say claim because, you know, that could be up for debate, but we're not going to have that debate today. What we want to find out is what does the church think she can contribute to Vision 2030? And what does the church understand Vision 2030 to mean? Not just for Zimbabwe, but also for the region. So I'm going to invite Bishop Muparutsa, who is the current president of the Evangelical Fellowship of Zimbabwe. So he is going to answer really, Bishop, what the process of Vision 2030 means for the church. And if I could just quickly introduce him in a few words, and then he's going to say something more about himself very quickly, and then go into his presentation. I've got somebody who's ready to share his presentation as well as he goes through it. So for those who are not aware, Bishop Muparutsa, like I said, is the current president of the Evangelical Fellowship of Zimbabwe, which has over 800 member organizations covering millions of Christians in Zimbabwe. He is also the presiding bishop of the Pentecostal Assemblies of Zimbabwe, a denomination that has been in existence for over 70 years. He's traveled extensively preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, and he has mentored and served as a trusted advisor to numerous leaders, both in the area of business, in the area of politics, and for people who are working extensively to bring development and transformation to Zimbabwe. So he is somebody that we can hold in high regard. Bishop Muparutsa, I would invite you to take the podium and talk to us about why you think the church can be involved in Vision 2030 and what that means for the church.
Thank you, Belinda. Thank you very much. I want to say thank you, and I want to honor the organizers of this very important webinar, in particular, Dr. Marisa and Sivio, and the partners and my fellow speakers who are here today, and all the participants. We appreciate the process and what Zimbabweans are doing and what Zimbabweans are up to. It's an exciting time and exciting moment, even though we are struggling to rise up against the COVID-19 pandemic. We are so grateful for that. Without really, I know we are pressed for time. Maybe we can have my presentation put on the screen so we can quickly go into the presentation so as to save time. So it's good to see you, Steve. God bless you. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much. I hope we will be able to flow nicely there together. Let's move on straight to the next slide. I don't have to say much about myself. I am simply a servant of God and a servant in the nation, just to serve our nation, be proud of being Zimbabweans and being patriotic Zimbabweans, and we give glory to God for that. Okay, let's go on to the slide number 2. Thank you, so that we can move and be on time. Whoever is sharing my slides, you can help me so that we can move on time. Thank you. I'm just waiting for the slides to start rolling. Otherwise, I hope everyone is good and proudly Zimbabwean.
Yes, Bishop, I think she might be having a small technical challenge.
Okay, whilst
talk, even as she's starting to share her screen.
Okay, so I may as well start my conversation while she's trying to do that. This presentation today, ladies and gentlemen, will cover just a few things that I think the role the church can play. Number one, the church can play the role of being the conscience of the nation in trying to achieve Vision 2030. The church can also play the role of an encourager. The church can also play the role of a socializing agent. The church can also play the role of an educator, as well as the role of a representative. I think I'll try and articulate those 5 roles there are many things the church can do, but for the sake of this short presentation, I will dwell on those 5 things and try and articulate those. Okay. Thank you very much. So reading through the Vision 2030, there is both an expectation and anticipation that it arouses in the citizenry. There is expectation that, number one, government will remain consistent in its promises. Government deals decisively with obstacles such as corruption. The international community in its diplomatic and economic clout will favorably respond to the call. The Zimbabwe is open for business. Okay, it looks like my notes are there now. Okay, thank you very much. The people can get employment opportunities, engage in favorable business partnerships, while trickle-down effect can be felt across the value chain in the nation. Very, very important, just as you look at the context itself. The anticipation is that the people of Zimbabwe will embrace and support this noble vision and aspirations. There will be social, we also anticipate that there will be social and political cohesion to push and pull this vision statement and plan of action, that at the end of the day, the Zimbabwean people can enjoy the fruit of this very important piece of vision. So number one, the role of the church can play in bringing the Vision 2030 to fruition will be, number one, the role of to serve as the conscience of society. To serve as the conscience of society. We often ask, is this the Zimbabwe we want? We often ask that question, is this the Zimbabwe we want? We have all been asking the same question. The pain is more on those who are older than it is on the younger people. The younger people, some of them have seen the Zimbabwe that we see, but the older ones have seen probably, some of them have lived in 6 type of Zimbabweans: Zimbabwe Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, Zimbabwean Nyasaland, all those Zimbabweans. Some have known that country in its 6 forms. But what is important for the church is that Proverbs 29:18 says, where there is no revelation or where there is no vision, people cast restraint, but blessed is the one who heeds wisdom's instruction. Very important. We are grateful to the government of Zimbabwe, to His Excellence President E.D. Mnangagwa, for espousing Vision 2030. We are very grateful for that. And as the church, we call the nation to stop, pause, look back, look at the now, and look ahead with honest discussions, which is what we are doing, which is what I'm glad that Dr. Marisa and your team are trying to help us as a nation to do. Just stop and be honest and have an honest discussion, which is very, very important. Okay? Through such engagements, through such interactive engagement, areas of progress must be highlighted, celebrated, protected, to avoid regression, while areas of challenge or challenges must honestly be identified and strategies adopted to minimize or eliminate the same. It is important that we teach this as a church. 2 wrongs cannot make a right. Love your neighbor as yourself. If you do that, and that's what the church should do to encourage Zimbabweans not to hate one another as we pursue Vision 2030, not to be selfish, very important. So love one another, love your neighbor as you love yourself. The role, the second thing is the role, probably is the third now, the role of as an encourager, the role as an encourager. It is encouraging to note the great strides being made by the government. Now, the church must also encourage the government to continue doing what is right. Relative peace in the country, reforms through the, through the ease of doing business, in the re-engaging the international community, spearheading of massive infrastructure development, as well as reviving productivity in the agriculture and mining sector, amongst many other achievements that they are doing. So as a church, we think we must also be the encourager. We must stand alongside a government where government is doing good to encourage, as well as critique, constructive criticism, areas where government needs to continue to do good. Our role as a church is to encourage the leaders in government and society. You're going too fast a little bit. Thank you. And society to communicate the vision and to follow through as well, so that it is no longer all talk but without anything to show for it. I like what Dr. Muparutsa said. It now must be the Zimbabwean vision. It must move away from being sectorial. It must be embraced, and the church can play that role to make sure that Zimbabweans embrace Vision 2030. We are not obviously of, we are not obviously of the difficulties, and still we are here to encourage our leaders not to give up the effort to find each other. We are to learn to persevere till we can speak to each other as opposed to talking at each other. The church can encourage that. In order for this vision to take off, all Zimbabweans, being a ruling party, opposition party, church, business, we must all find each other on the same table to discuss and to make this a success. The scriptures say, do not grow weary in doing good, for it is in due season you shall reap the harvest. Where there is a will, there is obviously a way. We are not alone, and the government is not alone. We need to encourage the whole entire nation. The church can play that very important role to encourage the nation to rally behind such a noble cause. The next thing is our role as a socializing agent. A socialization agent, the church can play that very well. When our maker made us, we were instructed to work the garden and to keep it. To work the garden and keep it. In our teaching and preaching, we condemn the love of money, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life, crime, bribes, and all forms of corrupt activities, while exhorting the nation to be faithful, honest, hardworking, and generous. That's what the church can also do. You can't reach Vision 2030 as it is without a hardworking nation. The church can do that very well and move our people from the mentality of dealings. You know what we mean in Zimbabwe? I'm doing my deal. To a nation that espouses the spirit of hard work, production, rather than dealing from one person to the other without producing. Through the teachings and instruction, discipleship of the church, such as developing a positive work ethic, positive life outlook, the values of good stewardship, accountability, collaborative efforts, the Vision 2030 can indeed be realized. We need to help and work our young people. That is not just a click of a button. That is the most in thing, but also to be able to apply ourselves to hard work to make sure things come to pass. The church is very good at doing that. We spend most of the time with the people, and we can do that to make sure that Vision 2030 is realized. The role of an educator. The role of an educator. Okay. We are not only shepherds, saints, spiritual, but we disciple. We also can have a disciple effect on the church as we minister, and also deploy people who are well groomed, well taught. We can disciple people and deploy them. I know people always cry, and most of the people that are in politics, whether whichever party, most of them are in church. And I always blame the church, that the church cannot cry because the people are corrupt. If Zimbabwe is 80% Christian, then what's going on? It's the problem still lies squarely on the doorsteps of the church. We are developing corrupt people, and I think we need to change our preaching and our teaching as to make sure that Vision 2030 is espoused or is achieved. We train leaders using biblical models such as espoused in Exodus 18 verse 21. And for the Vision 2030 to be realized, we need able men. We need able men. We need God-fearing men. We need men of truth, men who hate covetousness, which is very important. With these, you cannot have corrupt people. It's amazing that you have corrupt people policing corrupt people. It's amazing in Zimbabwe. And that's what the church must work on, to help that those who are policing the corrupt must not be corrupt. Those who are guarding must not be guarded as well. And that can only be done if the church begin to, in its pulpit, on all our pulpits, begin to teach the kind of truth that the Bible is teaching. Often this role can be politicized either way, but we are in the clear. We choose to remain non-partisan, non-violent as church leaders. The scripture says people cannot repent unless someone has been sent to preach to them their need to repent. Likewise, without credible information on the goings on, the church struggles to leave this role in raising awareness within our membership on key national developments and calls that requires collective involvement, ownership, and participation. That's the role the church can play. Therefore, it is important that there be platforms to engage the church, empower the church with credible information of process results and gaps that we can also come in and cover. Often, citizens respect the church leaders. Therefore, church leaders can be very useful. It can be very, very useful. Finally, the role of representation. Representing, first of all, the people. It is known that the majority of the people in this country belong to one local church or another, with their spiritual leaders having a reasonable amount of influence over their values and beliefs and practices. Therefore, the church can be utilized, is available to disseminate key information. In this sense, the church has a better opportunity to know how the ordinary people or person are living their feelings, emotions, perceptions of life and progress, a burden which then pushes church leadership to escalate issues of bread and butter, issues of hope and aspiration of the state in a representative capacity. The church has that capacity to do that, representing the nation. Number one, representing the people, representing the nation beyond the national boundaries. The church is a global institution with its diplomatic and goodwill infrastructure, which can be engaged to assist the nation and government. Sorry, somebody must have moved me a bit faster there. Okay. in international re-engagement efforts. I really think the church is the best platform to do that, because we have no other interests except the interests of the people. And the church can be of great use for international engagement. And obviously the church, besides representing the people of the nation, we represent God. We represent the kingdom of God. We do not believe that the church serves as the prophet to and over the nation without a task of being to forthtell, and lead the nation in understanding a godly society needs godly models. The church must uphold the truth, and this often results in the church issuing pastoral letters aimed at lovingly redeem before more harm or irreparable damage occurs to our conscience and our character and actions. Thank you very much. Move on to the next example of our practice. As the church, the Lord Jesus admonishes the church to serve as a salt of the earth and the light of the world in order for God's people to live a fulfilled life. The landmark of contribution from the church of recent times, thank you, remains the development of the Zimbabwean national vision and values discussed document aimed at steering a process of shared vision, values, and vehicles. Yes, we can notice how this document has remained alive, even informing the Vision 2030. In the recent past, the church, in its instance, the collective Christian bodies under the banner of the Zimbabweans of Christian denomination, ZHOCD, has made some strides towards promoting social cohesion before, during, and post-elections. We continue to make public calls for the comprehensive national dialogue for transformation, for without a cohesive society within an enabling environment for the constructive dialogue and engagement beyond politicians and their interests, this vision will not easily be attained within the remaining 9 years. So it is important that the church can come aboard so that the entire nation can be involved. And the church is the best catalyst. The church is the best agent to do that, to help Vision 2030. I think in the interest of time, I can end here. The slides are available. I just want to be cognizant of the time. Unless if I, thank you very much.
No, that's fine. Thank you so much, Bishop. I will have one question. I'm sure there's questions that are probably going to come into the chat. I loved your presentation, and unfortunately we don't have more time. But what I will leave you with, which we can talk about in the discussion later, is, so what happens tomorrow? Do you know what I mean? Like, when we leave this room, yes, we've discussed this. We want to be an educator. We want to be an encourager. But what happens tomorrow? What specific steps can the church take tomorrow? So I'll leave you to think about that. I don't want to put you on the spot. Whilst we bring up our next speaker, and who's going to be talking as a representative of the youth. So I'll invite Nicolatte, who I'm just going to introduce right now. So Nicolatte Matuku, she's in the meeting room. If you could also just get ready. She is the CEO of the Association of African Future Leaders, which is under the model of the United Nations. And that outfit is responsible for scouting youth that are excelling as entrepreneurs and as professionals, and works to expose them on a regional level for upskilling in terms of funding and global participation for the work that they're doing. She's got over 10 years experience in youth marketing and business development strategy, and she practices and teaches on climate change, food security, sustainability, and national adaptation plans for various African countries. She's also the founder of Walking the African Journey, which is a youth empowerment organization with a footprint in a number of Southern African countries. So Lesotho, Swaziland, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Malawi. And Nicolatte, I will invite you right now to unmute your mic and give a quick introduction and then go straight into your presentation. And basically, Nicolatte, what we want to know from you is what does the process of Vision 2030 mean for young people? How can young people get involved? What should young people be doing? And then I'll also ask you the same question. Then what happens tomorrow? You are representing the youth significantly. So what's going to happen tomorrow? We don't want this to be theoretical. We want to get involved as citizens and to create a process of co-production. So what happens tomorrow? I'll leave you to do your presentation and to just think about that.
Thank you so much, Belinda, and thank you for having me. Thanks to CVO for actually creating platforms like this, where we actually take our work from Africa, but right back to Zimbabwe that we dearly love. I'm Nicolatte Matuku. I'm 31, based in Johannesburg, but I work in the continent and I am passionate about my country, where we come from. As Belinda said, I am CEO. I was appointed CEO of the Association of African Future Leaders under the Model United Nations. We are currently in 7 countries, and due to COVID, we weren't able to expand, but we are getting there. And our sole purpose within the Model United Nations is actually teaching and conscientizing young people within the continent to actually break out of their shells and start making a difference from their own communities, so that it spills over into the nation and into the region, and more so into the global platform, global village. So I think that's my main job. I do a lot of youth development, and yeah, I'm ready to jump into the presentation. Yeah, you can just go to the second slide. So I wanted to actually start with defining what national development is and how we actually understand it. So I actually see national development as a holistic approach that encompasses growth, reconstruction, restructuring, and maintenance of current successes. And by holistic, we mean economically, politically, socially, scientifically, and culturally. So all the aspects that actually make up people or a citizen or communities. So it is every aspect that has to do with people's lives is what we call, is how I would like to look at national development. The second definition from John Vasey that I actually love when it comes to national development is the total effect of all citizen forces in addition to the stock of physical, human resources, knowledge, and skill. Why I particularly love this definition is it looks at also citizen participation, not us being mere passive citizens, but actually actively adding on to what the government is doing, what the private sector is doing, how citizens can also jump in and help the 2030 vision. So when we talk about development, it includes all aspects of life of an individual and a nation. And development is an ongoing process. It's continuation, forward movement, and momentum. So it's not, so now it's Vision 2030. We are 9 years from it now, and we are slowly getting there, I think. But we will see as I get into my my presentation. Going on to the next slide, I wanted to give a general outlook of how the youth perceive development in our country, Zimbabwe. What is the general feeling? How do they view development currently? So development is largely viewed as economical and political. Bear in mind, our definition says it's a holistic approach. However, our youth view it as an economical and political process, and the youth are oblivious to other aspects of development, that is, your social and cultural processes, and we don't blame them looking at the political environment and atmosphere in our country. So I'm just going to jump into those two aspects. Firstly, the economical aspect of how they view Zimbabwe. Employment and unemployment realities, despite the 2030 vision and what the document says, the document written by His Excellency, the President, says, they want to take 80% unemployment rate and reduce it to under 50%. However, when the youth look at this aspect, they have lost hope in unemployment. This is the youth that are currently the youth under the ages of 35 and those that are studying towards a degree. So they view unemployment as a thing of the past. They have no hope in being economically empowered through employment. Subsistence entrepreneurship and informal businesses for survival. So the youth actually see subsistence entrepreneurship, and what do I mean by that? I mean entrepreneurship that yields results financially for their own families or for themselves to actually survive. So they don't have a national vision or a regional vision when it comes to business development and small business development. It's all about hand to mouth. Am I surviving? And am I okay? Do I have money in my account? Do I have money in my mobile phone? So that is all they look at when they look at entrepreneurship and the informal business sector. So the youth also engage and focus in trending, or what we call popularist, but practically unsustainable industries that are capital intensive. So we see your agriculture being the trending, and mining being the trending businesses that the youth are looking at, not because they're interested in it, not because they actually understand it, and not because they have a passion for it, but just because it's the industry that is trending. It's where they can get help. And that way, we then focus on those industries because they bring immediate ramification compared to other industries, and other industries then suffer from it. And we see lots of young people doing agriculture now, and like I said, other industries then get to suffer. Individualism is also a big thing. The notion of personal growth and success vis-a-vis collective growth and development. So this is a thing that actually worries me the most, where young people just want to make sure they are okay, and they don't really take into account what the community is going through and what the nation is going through. So yeah, this is one thing that we actually need to address, and just get young people again interested in their country, their communities, and we do understand why they do that actually. So economically, the view or the perception of the current development state as a direct result of economic classification. So we see that in other countries, we have economic classes where we have the middle class, within the youth, the middle class, the upper class, and the lower class. But in our country, in Zimbabwe, within the youth group, we've been able to actually classify them into three classes. New classes, as I call it: the urban, the township, and the rural youth. So the urban having access to, being in major cities, having access to money, having access to a market. The township youth engaging in informal businesses, and the rural youth, that is more of the forgotten youth that either then migrate to the town, or they stay on and practice subsistence ways of farming. And geographic location factors, which is also what I've just explained with regards to the classification of the youth that we currently see now. So the youth perspective on development in Zimbabwe politically, development in politics is perceived as a governance and leadership issue. So we see nepotism. They keep on talking about nepotism despite what the Vision 2020 says, where it talks about meritocracy, where people actually gain political opinion, political participation due to them actually qualifying for what it is they'll be participating in within the political spectrum. So we see nepotism, and they constantly talk about it, and they don't want to engage into really into any political practical activity on the ground because they keep talking about nepotism being an issue. Separatist and disunity in politics. We find that we have two big political parties in Zimbabwe, and young people are afraid. It's fear, actually. They're afraid to actually engage in a political discourse or whatever it is for fear of either missing out on economic opportunities that come with supporting the other party. So politics is separatist. If you then support one party, you run at risk of actually getting economic ramification from the other one. So there's disunity within the youth. There's separation there, where the ones that support one party are doing well, and the other ones are just striving for a better political environment and are left out in doing so. So absence of meaningful and authentic representation. So we here talk about youth inclusion, youth participation, but I think it's all in black and white. Honestly speaking, it's in black and white. It's on paper. It's actually not meaningful and real and authentic. So we have a few people representing the youth, but we need diverse representation of all groups of young people, like I said, urban, township, and rural, and gender as well. So, there is no real representation when it comes to youth participation. Discriminative and non-inclusive political processes and decision-making, which leads to fear and skepticism. So we see with regards to we have that generational gap when it comes to political decision-making and political processes. There's no real political education that's happening amongst the young people. We only hear about political discourse or discussion or awareness when we are going to elections, but besides that, politics is so much more than that. It has to do with decisions about country, the country's development and all of that. So we have exclusion of young people in education of politics and decision making. So because of that, young people actually shy away from the core of politics, which is them learning the processes and actually learning how decisions are made, the Constitution and all of that. So because of that, political interest and participation therefore decreases within the young people. So I think politically, in as much as development is concerned, instead of us striving towards the 2030 goal, I think we're actually pulling in the opposite direction when it comes to that. Going into the next slide. So what is the role of the youth when it comes to Vision 2030 for Zimbabwe? So in as much as Vision 2030 is a global movement, it is important to also bring down the vision to 2030 to a national level and community level for sustainable societies in our country. And we need to have the youth at the forefront of this. Instead of the youth being passive beneficiaries of the 2030 agenda, should it be yielding any result, they must actually actively participate in the processes, in the process towards that decision making, impactful and have impactful implementation to combat the basics, which is poverty, hunger, inequality, education, and unemployment. So the role of the youth. The youth must research, conscientize themselves, and understand the national and regional 2030 development goals. They should constantly be informed, mentally stimulated, to bring diverse and contemporary ideas. So knowledge is power. The more young people research and get to know what the 2030 vision is and what we're striving for as a country, this is on them. They should actually start conscientizing themselves and empowering themselves knowledge-wise. Number two, they have a role to stand out and identify opportunities that will shape today and the future, including technology-based solutions, innovation that supports economic recovery, and promoting sustainable environment solutions, such as clean energy, green economy, and circular economy for sustainability. So most young people say, yes, Nicolatte, you say that, but the economic environment does not allow that. I've been to West African countries than what we're experiencing in Zimbabwe now, and they're actually striving to achieve their own goals. So I think there's always a way that we can actually work through this, as per my suggestions. Number three, they ought to upskill and train in relevant fields that relate to or are in line with Vision 2030, e.g. the STEM and science. So we see that with COVID coming and us being in 4IR, there are so many industries that are becoming obsolete. And for young people that have studied, in these industries, I think it's important that they upskill and even take a different direction from what they initially studied, and start looking at what will be relevant in the next 10 years, what industries will actually yield them or qualify them to get into employment or business within the next 10 years, so that they don't get left out. They should take the initiative to take on leadership advocacy and lobbying to ensure that youth inclusion and engagement is real. So we actually spoke about inclusion. Sorry, I just saw a message that says my time is up. 2 more minutes. They must participate in local and national decision-making processes, participate in implementation, join organizations that advocate for relatable development and eco-inclusion. Let's join NGOs, civil groups, and community-based initiatives that actually help. I'm just going to jump on to challenges and try and do that in 2 minutes. Challenges for Zimbabwean youth. So we have a lost generation that we can't ignore, a deeply affected youth with little or no skill or practical learning. This generation is hardly employable, with socioeconomic scars that bear long-term effects, which limit the individual's ability to achieve their potential. And that's the biggest challenge. Lack of opportunities for engagement across all socioeconomic classes, a politicized economy, parastatals, youth support, and grant and agencies are all hawked by a ruling party. So it's hard for young people to actually penetrate that and start working in those organizations. A pervasive political permeation, even in the private sector. It's so difficult for private sector to actually, thrive in economic environments without actually kind of being on the fence or supporting a ruling party. Negative media and public opinion. So we see young people are also so much into online media. They spend so much time in there consuming negative media and opinions, and we just encourage them, to start looking at the positive, start thinking positively, start changing the narrative and being advocates of the country. Just accessibility of opportunities. Okay. I had 2 more slides, but they will be available, but my time is up and I will be available for questions. Belinda, over to you.
Thank you so much, Nicolatte, for that presentation. So I think your next 2 slides, I'll just show. The first one was on opportunities. Maybe you can give an overview of what it will look like when we are doing our discussion. But as you do that, please could you be thinking about just listening to your presentation. I really loved how you outlined the issues. I think, again, in this process, what we would like to do is to encourage kind of a practical sort of grassroots movement. So I'll put that out to you and say, as you're going to be talking about opportunities, what can we do tomorrow? I'll bring that question again to you, just like I brought it to Bishop. So thank you for your presentation. I think we'll move on to our next speaker. For that, I think I need to, okay, I've stopped screen sharing. So I'm going to call upon our next speaker now, who is Dr. Kanyenze, Dr. Godfrey Kanyenze. So he is, I've known him for just maybe a couple of years, but he is, he's not a stranger to the world of research, of social justice, and anything related to that. So he is a passionate social justice activist, and I know he would not introduce himself like what I've just done. He has very succinct language that he uses, which mine will be slightly different. So he is, like I said, a passionate social justice activist. And many of you may not be aware of who this man is, but he is a renowned academic. So we all know him as the go-to guy when you want to know a lot about Zimbabwe. In the 90s, he was the inaugural board chair of the Poverty Reduction Trust, and he was responsible for the production of the Human Development Report for Zimbabwe. He uses his research skills extensively to influence evidence-based policy formulation. And for slightly longer than I've been alive, so for over 30 years, he's got experience working in labor movements in Zimbabwe and in the region with key institutions such as the International Labour Organization and many others. He's held several leadership positions, including serving on the board for the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, National Statistics Agency, commonly known as ZimStat. He established the Research and Advocacy Unit at the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions, where he spent over 17 years. Currently, he's the founder and executive director of LEDRIZ, which is the Labor and Economic Development Research Institute of Zimbabwe. This is one of the main think tanks in Zimbabwe, if you're not aware. So, pity we can't do a round of applause, but Dr. Kanyenze, welcome. Good morning to you. And I think you are going to be sharing your presentation, so you can go for it, Doc. You'll see something on your screen popping up when your time is almost up. So Dr. Kanyenze, over to you.
Thank you so very much, Belinda. Thank you for the kind words. Thanks very much to Civil Institute for organizing this very historic and important platform. May I just acknowledge my bishop, Muparutsa, Coletta and Nicolatte, and the other speakers that are going to come, as well as all the participants that are on this platform. I've been requested to speak to the history of social contracts in Zimbabwe, as well as vision setting. In the invitation, it was emphasized that I should focus on the benefits of social contracts from other countries, which I will do, provide a summary of attempts at social contracts in Zimbabwe, the challenges and obstacles, opportunities for current and future engagements around the social contract process in Zimbabwe, the key groups for a successful social contract in the context of Zimbabwe. So I will basically start by defining what a social contract, social dialogue, or at times it's referred to as social consultation, is all about. It involves bringing together divergent stakeholders to co-design, to co-produce, to co-determine, in German they call it co-determination, the path the economy is going to follow. So social consultation, I like the word because it denotes cooperation as among opposing factions, which is aimed at effecting a unified proposal or concerted action. So in essence, you don't necessarily have to be in agreement. You have to be coming from diverse backgrounds, key stakeholders being involved. That's what social dialogue or social consultation is all about. So social dialogue involves all types of negotiation consultation on information sharing, among representatives of government, employers, workers, and other key stakeholders on issues of common interest relating to economic and social policy. So there is no sort of sacred cow in terms of the issues that can be discussed. Whatever any nation or group of people decide is important can actually be negotiated on. So it has three major components, namely information exchange, secondly, consultation, negotiation, dispute resolution. So whenever you talk, you must also understand that probably you may not agree. So there has to be also a process of how to deal with conflict or disputes that arise out of the cooperation. So the most basic process of social dialogue is, of course, the exchange of information, which generally is a precondition for the more substantive forms of negotiation and basically agreement. If, for example, you choose to negotiate a social contract. So typically, all forms of social dialogue are either informal or ad hoc or formal and institutionalized. However, in practice, basically, they combine both the informal dimension as well as the formal dimensions. So there are three reasons that are often given in terms of why social dialogue as a form of governance is important. So through information sharing, the quality of policy design and strategies for recovery can be improved. So in essence, when you co-determine, you are bringing the innovation, the creativity of a multitude of stakeholders. And of course, that definitely enhances the quality of policy. So social dialogue also helps build trust in and commitment to policies, making it easier for their rapid and more effective implementation. You spend less time once you have agreed in conflict, fighting each other. When you have agreed on something, you now move in concert. That is another advantage that it brings together. It breeds trust and commitment amongst stakeholders. It also helps to resolve inevitable differences and avoid conflicts of interest, which could delay implementation of policies and ultimately recovery. I heard Bishop Muparutsa indicating or reminding us that there's only nine years remaining to Vision 2030. So in essence, instead of us now discussing it in midstream and starting questioning each other and so forth, and time is wasted, upfront we should have actually undertaken an inclusive process of social dialogue, of envisioning where we want to go as a country. Once we agree, then we begin to implement. So the challenge then is that we are now implementing, but we are still not happy with quite a number of aspects of that vision and the processes that informed it. So in essence, it's always important to begin with inclusive processes. So in the apt words of the Director General of the ILO, social dialogue is a public good. It brings all of us together. In a way, it helps us to address problems in a fair, inclusive manner, and basically it leaves no one behind. So social dialogue can complement or strengthen existing forms of governance in the context of sustainable development. So it is in itself a space of governance which can accommodate a broad range of actors. So I think it's very important to ensure that instead of just filling one bus, we have so many buses that are actually converging, that are already in agreement in terms of co-determining the path that the country is going to take. So I'll move on now to look at the experiences from other countries. The ILO has promoted social dialogue, for example, as a response to crisis situations. And it has been seen that countries that involved social partners, that had well-established social dialogue institutions, reacted more rapidly and efficiently, for example, to the 2008-2009 financial and economic crisis. So when you are faced with a crisis, the quickest way of getting out is through social dialogue, is through social consultation, is through co-determination, is through co-designing and co-production that Dr. Murisa highlighted up front. So there are quite a number of countries here. I've just highlighted a few. You may recall South Africa, and right at the start, they started with the Convention for Democratic South Africa, which brought together key stakeholders to determine the post-independence scenario in that country. So that episode was quite an exemplary approach to an inclusive process. Tunisia is another example recently where a democratic transition after the revolution of 2011 enabled the country to transition to democracy more peacefully than other Arab countries that had also gone through the Arab Spring. One of the examples that we've looked at in Zimbabwe and under the tripartite negotiating forum is the example of Ireland in the 80s and 90s. They came up with various social contracts, social accords, where they agreed to resolve certain challenges that the Irish economy was experiencing with outstanding results. I won't go into the details. You'll be able to look at that. Even other countries that were going through transition, as the former Soviet countries like Hungary, Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Poland, etc., they also used social dialogue as a basis for navigating the treacherous terrain of transition. So in essence, they relied on social dialogue and co-determination to map out a less contentious route out of the challenges that they were faced with. We've got a very interesting example from South Africa from an institutional setup where they've got NEDLAC, the National Economic Development and Labor Council, which is made up of government, business, labor, and community. And other community, there are women's organizations, the National Youth Council, the National Civic Organization representative, the Disability People of South Africa, the National Association of Cooperatives of South Africa, the Financial Sector Coalition. So you can see in South Africa, they've got an institutionalized statutory body that is responsible for this process of co-determination or co-designing the path that the economy can follow. And in the case of South Africa, they've come up with various agreements around, for example, how to recover from the crisis in 2009. They also came up with a green economy accord in 2011, how many green jobs they wanted to create. They also recently came up with an economic recovery and social impact to support ESCOM. This is a parastatal reforms. They have also come up with responses to COVID-19. In the case of South Africa, all the emergency relief measures that the government adopts, or the stimulation measures that government has been adopting in that country to mitigate the impact of COVID, have gone through this NEDLAC structure. So it's an institutionalized structure that affords the key stakeholders the opportunity to co-design and co-produce. A very interesting example that I've also flagged out is the case of Tunisia, which I've already highlighted after the Jasmine Revolution, the Arab Spring of 2011, that removed the former leader and created a transition towards democracy. There were a quartet of civil society organizations, the trade unions, the Employers Association, the Bar Association, and the Human Rights Associations. The four came together to spearhead and drive the process of co-determination. And as a result, in 2015, Tunisia received the World Peace Award for the efforts that they had made towards a peaceful transition. So that is another very interesting example. From those experiences, there are certain key principles that can be flagged out that highlight what is required for successful outcomes. The first is what Dr. Marisa already highlighted. You need strong, independent organizations with technical capacity, with access to the relevant information so that they can participate. You need the political will and commitment to engage in social dialogue on the part of all the parties. You need respect for the fundamental rights and freedoms of all the parties. You need appropriate institutional support, including through funding, so that you can actually build the capacity of all the groups that are participating. The availability of experience in sharing trust, as well as negotiating in good faith, are also critical aspects. the need for accurate information and sound information exchange, political stability and an accommodating institutional context. Institutionalization of the participation is critical. So I think it has been found that where dialogue is more institutionalized than ad hoc, the chances are better to achieve the goals or aspirations that have been set out, say, in the social contracts. So the issue of formalization is very critical to ensure that the dialogue is not necessarily ad hoc. Let me now move on to Zimbabwe's experiences with social dialogue and social contracts. It all started in 1995 when we actually came up with a Beyond ASAP book where we highlighted the challenges of the top-down approach or processes that led to the implementation of the Economic Structural Adjustment Program. I think you all recall that it was a top-down process. It was not inclusive. So as a result, we had proposed that the government establishes what we call the Zimbabwe Economic Development Council, ZEDIC, an inclusive structure to allow for dialogue. And then as a basis of that, as a result of that, there was a tripartite study tour of NEDLAC in South Africa in October 1996. Interestingly, there was also a parallel process that was emerging around the Smart Partnership Dialogue, the Langawi dialogues in Malaysia, where our government started participating in July 1995. And the Office of the President and Cabinet also agreed to also create similar dialogues in Zimbabwe. So as a result of this, the two initiatives were made. We basically worked with the Office of the President and Cabinet to create the National Economic Consultative Forum, which was launched in July 1997. But however, at the launch, it was indicated by government that this was going to be a voluntary association of citizens. It was not going to represent any institution. So people that were participating were going to do that in their individual capacities rather than representing constituencies. As a result, basically, ZCTU withdrew from the process, and following that withdrawal, the ZCTU never participated in the National Economic Consultative Forum. But however, as a result of the emerging crisis in the 1990s, in 1997 in particular, you recall the agreement to pay war veterans gratuities and pensions that had significant implications for the budget because it hadn't been budgeted for, and government was trying to come up with tax increases to raise revenues to meet that commitment to war veterans. As a result of that, you may recall in December 1997, ZCTU organized demonstrations protesting against the hardships that this arrangement was going to create. So basically, we've got two processes now. There was the National Economic Consultative Forum, which is still in existence, which is basically under the Office of the President and Cabinet, which basically involves mainly government and business in basically discussing, negotiating policies, but it does not negotiate social contracts. It's just basically an exchange of information, and hence it has been reduced to just a talk shop. So it is still in existence, but it has not really been able to negotiate social contracts. So as a result of the contestations between labor and government, especially after Zimbabwe entered the DRC war in August of 1998, and the economy started deteriorating rapidly, the Employers Confederation of Zimbabwe organized a meeting at State House in September of 1998. And that was the genesis of the tripartite negotiating forum where government, business, and the ZCTU met to iron out the differences. And they agreed, they reached a landmark agreement where government agreed to reverse the tax proposals that they'd come up with to raise revenues to fund the war veterans settlement. So as a result of that, in 2001, the tripartite negotiating forum came up with founding principles of the TNF. And what is very critical to underline is that they set out the preconditions, what was considered essential for successful social contracts. The first one, to negotiate and recommend, these were the specific terms of reference, and recommend to cabinet critical socio-economic challenges facing the country, to build confidence and portray a positive image of the country, to monitor the implementation of agreed positions. So the role of the TNF basically was to advise cabinet to come up with social protocols that would actually enhance policy making in the country. And what is also quite important is that the objectives were set out that to create a conducive, tolerant environment for the negotiation and conclusion of a social contract, to overcome stakeholder differences and work towards a common agenda based on a shared vision for national development. We are talking about shared vision to promote confidence among social partners and generate commitment towards the sustainability of social dialogue in the spirit of smart partnership and tripartism. So these were the objectives. And what was considered critical, and these are the underlying values and principles that were agreed upon as a basis for negotiating a social contract. The first one, cultivating a culture of tolerance and restraint, sharing a common vision regarding the future development of the country, negotiating in good faith, ensuring that social partners are accountable to each other, subordinating sectarian interests to the national interests, promoting mutually beneficial environment, a win-win outcome, adopting a flexible approach to negotiations, ensuring strict confidentiality on the issues that were under discussion. These were generally considered critical preconditions for successful social contracts. If you look at those, they also outline why we are still struggling in Zimbabwe, where the culture of tolerance and restraint is still missing, where the aspects of having a shared vision is still problematic, as Dr. Muparutsa has outlined. Negotiating good faith is still a challenge. Political will is a challenge. Subordinating sectarian interests is an issue. Being accountable to each other is also an issue. So you can already see why we're having all these problems in Zimbabwe. Very quickly, the TNF itself is also some successes. I've highlighted the tax relief measures of 1998, the declaration of intent that I've highlighted, the issues on the Kadoma declaration on addressing the totality of the challenges facing the economy, productivity institution, coming up with a statutory body in July 2019 on the basis of the South African experience. But what is critical to understand is that the social dialogue platform that we're discussing now is tripartite. It's much narrower than the South African one. The South African one also included community organizations and civil society. So that's one area that we can look at. So very quickly, Belinda, I can see you are on me. Very quickly, in terms of the challenges and obstacles, a meeting was held, a workshop with ILO in 2006. Basically, even up to now, these are the challenges that have undermined social contract development in Zimbabwe. Mistrust among social partners, polarization that Dr. Muparutsa highlighted, inadequate sharing of information, lack of a common understanding of the role of social dialogue and capacities of the partners, lack of an institutional framework, inadequate resource capacity, the lack of specific arrangement for the implementation and monitoring of the agreements. So once you agree, what are you going to do now in terms of the implementation, monitoring, and evaluation? And I quote there from the then Minister of Labor, who indicated that we were losing a unique opportunity to co-determine the way forward for the country. I'm almost there. The way forward, I think it's very clear that our constitution mandates, obligates government to involve the people in the formulation and the implementation of development plans and programs that affect them. So instead of just rushing with Vision 2030, the Constitution of 2013 obligates government to consult, to involve, and leave no one behind. The TNF Act itself, I've highlighted the various sections, the SDG mantra of leaving no one behind, the UN Boosted Development Effectiveness Agenda of 2011, which highlights democratic ownership and inclusivity and accountability as critical principles. The Vision 20 document itself, Belinda, highlights, extols the virtues of participatory decision-making, as well as consensus building through social contracts. And I've underlined that they highlight even the social stakeholders that must be involved, namely business, labor, and civil society. But at the moment, the TNF is still very narrow, it's still just tripartite. So we need to move, like South Africa now, to a multipartite, tripartite plus structure that goes beyond the three parties of government, business, and labor to include civil society and academia. Lastly, I also quote from the Africa Charter for Popular Participation, which reinforces and enforces the need, the importance of stakeholder participation as critical to resolve the challenges that we face as a nation. So thank you so very much. Majita Ngiyabonga Kosi Kyalebowa.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Kanyenze. I am going to ask you just to, I'm sure you've listened to the presentations from Bishop Muparutsa, from Nicolatte. We're going to have a discussion in a bit. I would like to find out from you, when you're saying let's, government should consult, what should those consultations look like on a daily sort of basis? So we're not now, but just in a minute, we're just going to take a presentation from our last speaker, and then we'll come back to having a quick discussion, because we also just are aware of the time. We need to keep within the time that we had allocated. So I know, Dr. Kanyenze, you've given a brief overview of what social contracts look like in other countries. Now we're going to hear from Dr. Stephen Brian, who is the Director of Policy at the Legatum Institute. And the Legatum Institute has done multitudes of research pieces on different countries, and basically trying to map out pathways to prosperity for a number of countries across the globe, including for Zimbabwe as well. And so, Steve, I would like to invite you now just to unmute your mic and talk to us about what you have observed in other countries, how the processes of developing social contracts or envisioning other nations have unfolded. And as you're unmuting your mic and getting yourself settled, I'll just give a quick overview of who Dr. Stephen Brian is, for those of you who've never seen or heard of him before, or some may not even be aware of what the Legatum Institute does. So, well, Stephen, in addition to overseeing the Institute's policy programs, his research focuses on socio-economic drivers of prosperity across the world. Stephen is passionate about finding solutions to reduce poverty and improve the lives of the most vulnerable in the United Kingdom, and of course through his research across the globe. He's been an advisor to governments in many countries in the Middle East and in Sub-Saharan Africa. And he's also an author. He's written a book called Dynamic Benefits, the Blueprint for Universal Credit and Outcome-Based Government. So Stephen, this is up to you. I'll give you 10 minutes. If you're able to summarize in 10 minutes, I'm so sorry, but you are our last speaker and we really want to get into a discussion after this. So go for it, Steve, okay?
Absolutely, Belinda. Thank you. Thank you for that very that generous introduction. I will do my best to stick within the allotted time. So as I'm waiting for the slides to come up, let me also sort of thank you all and Tendai, Bishop Muparutsa, Nicolatte, and Godfrey for some really interesting observations. I hope we can, through this last session, looking at the different experience of other countries, tie some of these themes together around the need for social dialogue, the need for engagement, because that's really a common thread that I've observed as I look at national vision processes around the world. Are we able to get the slides up? So let me kick off anyway in the spirit of the time available. I think the first thing to say, as we observe successful programs, is that there's a precursor to a good national vision, which is what we would describe as conciliation. I think to pick up on the sort of themes of today, it's around social dialogue. That if there isn't enough broad consensus about what's needed, it's very hard to establish a true national vision. And also, the other part is at the back end. It's all very well creating a vision. If we could move on to the next slide, that'd be great. It's all very well creating a vision, which at one level is a document, it's a piece of paper. What it also needs is to be followed up with what one might describe as a national transformation program. real action, real engagement by all actors in society, government, business, civil society, faith leaders, and others. And there's actually what we also see is a bit of a feedback loop that as a national vision starts to come together, that helps engender greater conciliation, a greater degree of social dialogue. And as the National Transformation Programme gets underway, that also informs the vision. These things all need to be consistent. But so yeah, let's focus on 3 countries that have, I think, in varying ways, developed a strong national vision and are in the process of delivering on it. Rwanda, post the genocide, from about 1980, 2000 onwards. Malaysia, coming back to around 1990. Saudi Arabia more recently, and one that I was personally involved in, 2015, 2016. So let's start with Rwanda as the first one on the next slide. That vision was launched in 2000, and it got revised in 2012. And the revision itself, at one level, at the highest level, was very simple set of principles: good governance in a capable state, human resource development and a knowledge-based economy, private sector-led economy, infrastructure development, productive and market-oriented agriculture, regional economic integration. So one level, what you see there is something pretty high level. It's designed deliberately to be a set of ambitions that it's easy to get people coalesced around. So as to one level, to avoid the need for a first order debate, a set of principles, a set of pillars that it's very easy to get everybody engaged in. The next level, of course, becomes more of a challenge. But what's interesting to note is, if we think of the history of Rwanda, the height of the genocide in 1994, it took 6 years to get to a vision. Obviously, there was the immediate aftermath of the conflict, but from around 97 to 2000, there was an extensive social dialogue. I think the Urugwiro process, so a serious discussion around the future of Rwanda, involving Rwandans from all walks of life, business community, government, academia, and civil society. So a real recognition that before putting a vision out there, that social dialogue, that sense of conciliation was needed. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a broad ownership of the vision. One of the quotes that I've seen from one of the ministers for local government said, the thinking in Vision 2020 and back to 97 was that we believe we need a unified nation to achieve development and provide services and peoples. That unified nation was a precursor. But he also said singing about unity is not enough. We still need the cement that's an equitable distribution for everybody in order to cement that sense of pride in nation. So that link between needing unity, needing delivery on the ground. And that delivery also came on the back of a very candid assessment of the challenges. So again, it wasn't just forward-looking, but grounding it in the reality of today and making sure that everybody recognized the same situation. So not only were the people on the ground saying, we know what life is like, but the government was playing back an interpretation of that was recognized. So genuine candor around low agricultural productivity, low level of human resource development, low infrastructure development. These are quotes from the vision that are setting out, look guys, we are at a starting point. We know we are. We're not going to kid ourselves, but we're together going to go forward. And then going forward, as you see on this slide, quantitative targets are very deliberate, very explicit targets in a whole range of areas. They had around 50 indicators and targets, setting out where are we today and where do we want to get to for Vision 2020. And then with each of these targets, specific programs associated with it. So GDP growth rate. So again, similar idea, how to get to a middle income country, but diving into more of the details. And there was sort of a theory of the case around how the more disaggregated goals, everything from education to infrastructure to health, we're all going to be aligning together to the overarching vision. So I'll keep going at pace so that we can go through 3 examples. Malaysia, slightly different starting point. There was still need for conciliation. So back in the 1990s, Malaysia had been through a few decades of progress, but the Malay and Chinese communities were not yet really feeling as if they were one Malaysia. The Chinese community appeared to be getting most of the benefits of the economic progress. The more indigenous Malayan community lacking access to education, lacking that sense of participation. So one of the challenges that Mohamed Mahathir put down on the table for the nation, he wasn't starting out with the vision of here's a set of solutions. He actually said, look, we've got a set of challenges. Let's buy in and recognize these challenges and then together work out how to solve them. So one challenge was establishing a united Malaysian nation, creating a psychologically liberated, secure and developed nation. Can we just go back to those challenges? Fostering and developing a mature democratic society, establishing a fully moral and ethical society. So what you see from these challenges is actually getting the nation to lift itself higher and ask itself, you know, what type of nation does it want to be? So before we used to get into some of the crunchy details about the economy and some of the tangible services people wanted, really getting to the point of aligning around a vision for the type of nation. And again, with this very candid assessment of how the private sector had not yet risen to the challenge, inadequate adoption of technology, a society where backwardness had been identified with particular tribal and ethnic groupings, you know, too many people, both urban and rural, in poverty. So again, really candid assessment. These were the challenges. And then one of the critical things, in addition to having some very key targets, was the implementation structure. So the back end, as I said, about the national transformation. And one of the things that has been set out in Malaysia and has really been one of the best examples around the world is a process that they've called PEMANDU, the Performance Management and Development Unit, sitting outside of the central government ministries, holding the government to account. So it's set up as a government structure, a bit like the central bank, but it is operating as independent of the delivery arm, keeping track of the targets, keeping track of the commitments of government ministers, encourage them to make commitments, and really holding government to account and being able to, which I think is quite interesting, stay as administrations change. So it helps to create the continuity for the plans. The plan, I think as Tendai was saying in his introduction, it's not a ZANU plan, it's not an NDC plan, etc. It was actually, in Malaysia, it was a plan for the nation. And PEMANDU was that unit that crossed administrations and held everybody's feet to the fire to make sure that the delivery happened. The other part was extensive engagement. So as the vision was being developed, the high-level vision, massive outreach to communities all around the country with sort of village halls, meetings of 100 people to discuss it and to buy in. And then very tangible labs where they brought workshops together to go from the high-level challenges to the details. So again, bringing business in, bringing civil society in, bringing other community leaders in. Now, the final example, Saudi Arabia, the one that I myself was quite involved in, has many of the same characteristics. It started, you know, again, with a high-level vision that everybody could buy into. So 3 big strands: an ambitious nation. So they recognize the need to enhance government effectiveness and to enable social responsibility. So a real shift in Saudi society to become one where society and the civic community had an important role. Growing and diversifying the economy from just simply being, can we just go back a slide, please? So just oil to a diversified economy that was engaged in manufacturing, farming, etc. Increasing employment. Again, there were high levels of youth unemployment, a desperate need to increase. And then culturally creating this vibrant society. So these were pillars that were easy for everybody to buy into, and then the detail was driven out of it. But let me tell you about a failed story. So before that vision came out, there was a first attempt at it. And I think there's echoes in some of the discussion, particularly from Tendai earlier on here. The Ministry of Economy and Planning developed a national transformation plan. And I was in there, and I played a role in developing this. So I'll put my hands up and acknowledge the mistakes, a number of mistakes. One, the time frame was 5 years, not long enough to make real change happen. Secondly, it was predominantly done within the ministry with teams of officials. And it probably, at first publication, was actually too detailed, too tangible. And as a result, in effect, there was sort of like a form of antibody rejection. It did not land successfully. It was very quickly withdrawn. It didn't really get into the public domain. The lessons had to be learned. Give it a longer time frame. Actually start with a higher level vision that everybody can buy into. Have the detailed plans ready, but actually follow the Malaysian example of bringing in everybody to actually reify and instantiate the vision. So the next slide will show you some pictures that I took off from my phone of the labs in Saudi Arabia. So we set out exactly the same thing. You see it on the next slide, the labs process of bringing people together and saying, okay, if we want to transform education, how do we do it? Let's get educators in. Let's get the businesses who want to hire and employ the educated people. Let's get some experts in from other countries. Is that, are we able to move the slide forward? Just want to give us a visual. So, getting people together and working through it, developing a fiscal plan that removed the oil subsidy but transformed it into a social welfare system, and that those sheets there and that page is a Gantt chart, the timing of creating a social welfare system. So we actually took over an entire office building and had 30 of these strands going simultaneously, bringing everybody together. And what that did, people had lanyards around, and they'd be walking around Riyadh, actually showing off the fact that they were part of this process. And we had probably 5,000-6,000 people in total through a year-long process getting involved and owning it. And as a result, it became quite detailed. So the next slide, this is really showing you how we went from 6 overarching objectives, 27 very tangible pieces. The labs then took each of those and developed much more tangible strategic objectives and a whole set of, in effect, long-running programs at the bottom to deliver it. But what we also did, we had a sort of group of us who worked really hard to make sure that those quantitative targets were mutually consistent. So if you had a GDP goal and an employment goal and a productivity goal and a capital investment goal and an education goal over a 20-30 year time period, could you deliver that GDP with that level of employment and that level of productivity? And would you have enough education to deliver the productivity and enough capital to allow that to happen? That was really critical to make sure that as you develop a plan, you don't have mutually inconsistent objectives. So that grinding that out was also a really important part of it. And could you credibly believe productivity rising at that rate over those years? Where else in the world other than China can we find examples of that happening? If we could, great. If we couldn't, we had to go back to the drawing board. So that was a really important part of it to get realism. And in the last minute, let me just give you the headlines on the last slide then of what are the success factors. Just go back. So this social dialogue, unity, conciliation, that's really necessary across all these examples if prerequisite. A candid assessment of where you are. The initial articulation needs to be quite high level to allow others to fill in the details and own the details. It needs to be ambitious but realistic, as per what I was saying about grinding out the detail. Targets and goals are quantified so that people can be held to account. And then widespread engagement. This is where you need surveys, labs, participation, so that you've got an army of people, not just a small bus load, but actually an army of people all bought into it, feeling they've contributed, they're owning it. And then longer run delivery units to implement like Pamandu, so that you can cross administrations, because this is a long-term endeavor. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, Steve. I loved the examples that you shared. And then I will, for the sake of time, I'm going to just ask one question to each of the people who've done presentations. I think just following on from the discussions that we've already had. And then I will invite Dr. Muparutsa to just give us some closing remarks, because I'm quite aware of the time that has run away from us. So I'll go back to Nicolatte and to Bishop. Maybe we can do Nicolatte ladies first. So you did want to touch on opportunities. We may not have time for that, but what I wanted to find out from you is, as somebody who is holding the position that you hold right now, how do you think, practically speaking, youth can be coordinated into a process of co-production? So listening to all the presentations that have been shared already, what are you taking from this, and what do you think young people need to do tomorrow? And what will you be doing from tomorrow onwards to make Vision 2030 possible?
Thank you for your question, Belinda. So I think that the practical way I do practical, and we deal with African youth from where they are and what they have, for them to be able to actually start. So it's a collective, I think Vision 2030 is a collective vision that we need to do. The youth need to know that they need to participate. The government and private sector and all these institutions, the church, they also need to play a part. But in relation to your question, it jumps onto the opportunities. Number one, they should start problem solving in their communities that they exist. They know what their problems are in their communities that they live in. So they should start identifying that and start solving it, start grouping together, unite and actually start solving problems in their community, which is how we started with our Walking the African Journey movement here. Identify problems in your society and start solving it. Maximize on the utilization of information and technology advances that have made us a global village, and start using, the online and websites and, digital, start using it effectively and impactfully. Equip yourself with skills. You can't start going to solve problems at a national level without actually understanding what's going on. So start getting free online courses. Go on YouTube and watch how other countries or other societies have done it, so that you've got information, so you can start your own. They call YouTube the practical university for young people, so they should start doing that. And I would say, lastly, they should, especially in Zimbabwe, they should start joining and, grabbing opportunities from institutions, NGOs, like CVO, and there are a lot of them, and there are pages where opportunities for Zimbabweans are posted. I'm happy to share those, so they can start grabbing those opportunities, learning and practically do pro bono work as well. I know young people don't want to hear about it, but it's how we start, but practically start doing pro bono work as well. And in terms of the government and the private sector, the church, and all these institutions, we need a youth resolution whereby the government, the public, and social and private institutions collectively establish training, guidance, infrastructure, and financial support to curb unemployment and just to grow SMEs. I think in a nutshell, that's how I would answer that question.
Okay. I'll still say you've given me a diplomatic answer, because
really,
yeah,
okay,
but
okay.
it's fine. Let's hear from the bishop. Bishop, I had asked tomorrow, what are you going to do? So you are overseeing millions, literally, of Zimbabweans across, through your involvement with the EFZ and being the president of the EFZ. And so you've come onto this platform, and you are able to influence strongly how the church outworks Vision 2030. What are you taking from this to do tomorrow, in the coming weeks, coming months? How are you going to get the church involved? What do you think needs to happen for the Vision 2030 to become practical, not just in a government office, but then for your church members as well?
Okay, thank you very much, Belinda. It's a privilege to lead. It's a privilege, and everybody must understand it's a privilege. I also sit here as the vice chairman of the Zimbabwe Heads of Christian Denominations, which is even much larger. That Zimbabwe Heads of Christian Denomination is what we call ZHOCD, which includes everybody, the Catholics, ZCC. I mean, EFZ, ZCC, Catholics, Judah Caesar, all of us there. I'm the vice chairman of that amalgamation. So what must happen from here, as far as I'm concerned, is the first and most important thing is time is up. We all have 9 years. Time is up. The clock is ticking. So what needs to be understood from a basically a church perspective, when you look at the configuration of the church, the youth we are talking about, my daughter was talking here, is in the church. If Zimbabwe is 80 to 90%, they are already there in the church. The women in all their stratas are in the church and they are in the political parties. So my perspective from here, number one, we must disseminate. We must be given enabling environment to disseminate, which already as a church, we don't need anyone to give us. We already have it anyway. Disseminate the Vision 2030 document to every, first of all, church umbrella body, okay? ZHOCD, we now have another arm called ZIC. Okay, give it to ZHOCD, okay? Or we must be able to have, first of all, a budget, obviously. From there, it must be disseminated to umbrella bodies like your EFZ, ZCC, UDA-CISA, and the like. It must go further down to church denominations, okay? If you want, for just to name but a few, Zioja, Apostolic Faith Mission, Pentecostal Assemblies of Zimbabwe, Celebration Church. I'm talking about, we have all these structures in the church. It must go further to the local assembly. In a local assembly, now you're really taking it away from being just a state or a political issue to bring it down to the individual who matters. Take it to a local assembly. A local assembly is a pastor. In a local assembly, you have church departments where you really find the youth, not as an organization, the person, the individual must get to know this vision. You have your local church departments, the men's, women's, youth, including in the church, including Sunday school. What we call Sunday school, but let me not use that convention, that name. Sunday school might not be understood in certain quarters of the church. Okay, let's call it children's church. Children's church. Imagine if this vision was given to the children to understand what Zimbabwe is all about, which we would call ECD in schools. Then take it further down to the family. Every household must get to know this vision. Imagine if a father sits with his children. The best teacher of a family is the father and the mother. If they then sit down with their children, proudly Zimbabwean, proud of this vision. In other words, the church must help depoliticize this vision. I hope you understand what I'm talking about. The problem why it can't move, it is too politicized. We must depoliticize Vision 2030 so that anyone called Zimbabwean is proud of it and is able to take it without its political court. As long as it has a political court, because this person doesn't like that political party, this person celebrates this political party, but does not celebrate that political party, it then stifles this development, this Vision 2030, which could be beneficial to every one of us for the sake of all of us. Please, for the sake of all of us, let's depoliticize Vision 2030, then we take it out, bang. So the church can help depoliticize it and give an outreach. You are asking me about, so tomorrow, what do we do? Just basically, that's what I think we must start by doing. But if you start running with it and you're not a political party, somebody may just begin to ask you the question, who are you? Because of the Zimbabwean culture and the way we behave and look at things, it becomes an issue. Depoliticization of Vision 2030 so that it belongs to every Zimbabwean, from those who are in the household, children, to the last person in any office. Okay, all right, brilliant. So I will give Dr. Kanyenze 30 seconds on how we can move forward practically. Literally 30 seconds, Doc.
Thanks very much. I very much liked Stephen's outline because it tallies with the preconditions that are highlighted. In Zimbabwe, we cannot move into the content unless we first of all begin with the context, the preconditions that Stephen highlighted, the reconciliation. There are so many things that still divide us. We are still divided by politics, we are divided by elections, we are divided by ethnicity, we are divided by religion. There are so many things we have to deal with that. The issue of nation building has to be the first issue on the agenda before we even move to the content in terms of what the vision is going to be about. So we need really to come up with the issues of reconciliation, forgiveness, truth, all those things, because there are so many legacy issues that have combined over time to undermine, nation building. The liberation struggle itself, there are still a lot of issues. The 1980s, the Gukura Hundis and so forth, the elections since 2000, the violence and so forth, every electoral cycle has brought in additional challenges that have further polarized us. So first of all, we need to arrest that the negativity, the negative dimensions, and then we need to start with the reconciliation, the truth, the candidness that Dr. Brian spoke about. We need that before we even talk about the vision. Almost my favorite example, Belinda, is what happened in 1966 during the liberation struggle. You remember the so-called Gallant Seven that fought at Chinhoyi. They fought because they felt that the seven of them were going to win the struggle. But the lesson was that unless and until it was transformed into a people's war. So after Chinhoyi, they stopped fighting, they put their guns down and started mobilizing the people so that the people understand why they were fighting, why it was important to take up guns and fight. When they did that now, the people became the water and the fighters became the fish. And it was easier now to achieve independence. Likewise with development, we need to start by addressing these legacy issues, these contextual issues that divide us before we start running in a minefield. Thank you.
Oh, brilliant. Stephen, 30 seconds on just what you've shared and what you've heard from the other presenters. What can Zimbabwe do going forward?
I'll pick it up very quickly from what we've just heard. Context before content is for me the slogan that's most important. And of all the three examples, I think the most challenging, but the one that might be the most productive, is to pick up on Dr. Mohamed Bhattir's approach in Malaysia by setting out a set of challenges and calling on the nation to address them. So rather than division, actually say, well, what are Zimbabwe's challenges? And we've heard about a few of them today, but can we construct them in a forward-looking way that calls on people to address them? And that might be the route through this, to create the context through articulating the challenges.
Okay, all right, brilliant. Thank you so much, Stephen, and to all our speakers. Thank you so much for your presentations today. And just a reminder, if you are watching us, we are live on Facebook, and for the presentations, I'm sure some people might be asking, how can we access the presentations? We just need to clear that with our presenters, because this is their intellectual property. So if we get the permission to share them, they will be available on the Civil Institute website. And that being said, Dr. Tendai Mrisa, I would like to invite you back once again. I'm so sorry to leave you such a short amount of time to do closing remarks. But if you could just summarize for us what we've learned today and what our next steps are. Just a reminder as well that this is the first in a 6-part series. So what can we look forward to in 2 weeks, and what can we take away from today's session?
Thank you so much, Belinda, and colleagues that spoke. This was a fantastic discussion. I don't know where the time went to. I could see, I can imagine if I'd allowed the doctors in the room, Stephen and Godfrey, to continue, we could have the whole day. And it was important because I think it helps to set the scene, to begin to say, number one, we are not the only country that is trying to go on this journey. And we are not the only ones with difficult circumstances or coming from a difficult history. Some countries are starting from a context of war, context of recovery from economic collapse like we're doing. And that helps us in terms of understanding that we can also do it. There is scope for this. But I think like I said at the beginning, that this process is going to be one of the most important things that we'll have to consider is the issue to do with the process itself. What Godfrey is raising our history, the unresolved issues in our history, in the post-colonial nation building process. That project cannot be short-circuited. That project actually creates a sense of others feeling like they're outsiders, they are not part of the national process. So if we cannot come to a place of a consensus around going forward when we have not resolved or we have not agreed on a path of resolving the issues to do with our past. So I think that is very important, and for us to sort of zero in on that and focus on that. And also for Nicolatte raising the issues to do with the youths, we acknowledge the importance of the youths in this, because the moment you talk about going forward, talking about a vision process that is 10 years in the making, 20 years in the making, the youths of today will be adults at that time, and their children will be asking them, when they were crafting this nonsense, where were you? Or when they were crafting this beautiful document, what was your role? Because it's always about that, to say, what do we do now to safeguard the future of those who are coming after us? As a generation, I'm in my 40s now, as a generation, we have a responsibility of building a better Zimbabwe for those coming after us. So I've spent the past 1.5 hours fielding some of the most important challenges in the background, some of them on Twitter. The question that I'm being asked is, why is a non-profit, a CSO organization, a civil society organization endorsing a national process, endorsing a partisan process? And it speaks to the polarization that is in our country. So guns are blazing. I've got friends of mine also in the opposition parties who are also calling me and maybe thinking that for some reason, maybe we're selling out on the struggle. But to reiterate, colleagues, this is a national process. And I said to somebody, I said, look, our tax dollars are being spent on realizing Vision 2030. Are you sure you don't want to engage? Are you sure you don't want to influence a process where they are taking your money? And just to leave it to say it's a partisan process, and we do not know the outcome of the next elections. What happens if nothing changes? Do we wait until political parties change? So I think we need to be very careful about national engagements. There's certain things that are purely partisan, then there's certain things that are national in nature. And this for us, even though it has originated maybe from a political party agenda, but that political party also happens to be the one that is ruling. Whether we like it or not, it is the party that directs the affairs of government. And for us, we've said we'll engage with everyone. So we have to engage. And it's very important for us to do that. But we engage from a position of principle. We are non-partisan, we're independent. We seek to influence policy processes to ensure, like I said, rather than just talking about an upper middle income status, income economy, we are talking about an inclusive upper middle income economy. And for us to achieve that, the process has to be right. So the issues that Godfrey has raised, the issues that Bishop Muparutsa is raising, to say, let's depoliticize this process. Let's give it agency that is neutral. So if it is in the church, that is fantastic. So going forward, we are going into discussions that some of them will be very specific, will be nitpicking. For instance, we'll be looking at what are the steps that we can take from an economic perspective, looking at specific value chains in agriculture, in mining, and also manufacturing, etc. What is needed? So we'll have webinars focused on that. And we're also going to focus on Zimbabwe's re-engagement with the international community, because we realize one thing, that Zimbabwe cannot achieve all its aspirations while it is in isolation. What will it take for Zimbabwe to be rehabilitated? What kind of reforms that Zimbabwe needs to put in place so that that rehabilitation takes place and certain conditions of isolation are lifted? And we're also going to be looking at social policy, because for us, the path towards a Vision 2030 is just not about economic results or economic performance. It's also about the well-being of people. So for us, we're very clear, we have a pro-poor thrust. So we want to make sure that social policy, especially as it regards the delivery of health, education, housing, transportation, and even food security, that it is put as a priority as well as we're talking about going towards Vision 2030. So that by the year 2030, we're saying that none of us are homeless. None of us are failing to access health services, etc. So these are some of the things that we're insisting upon as we discuss the journey towards Vision 2030. And finally, we're also going to talk about issues around institutions, strong institutions, the need for justice. Justice today, and also historical justice to deal with the historical injustices. So for us, we are excited that today at some point on the Zoom chat alone, we're close to 215 participants. We're not measuring our performance or our success just by the numbers, because unlike Bishop Muparutsa, we're not trying to create maybe a mega church here, but we're really trying to have a conversation on policy. And we appreciate that some policy discussions may look dry, but for us is to say, let's also, another word that I may throw in, let's de-technocratize policy processes so that citizens can also contribute meaningfully towards policy processes. That is our goal, to make sure that we are all included and we do not alienate others even by the language we use, but we make sure that we're there. So I think this has been a great start, and we're excited that colleagues came on board. You will be seeing certain faces throughout the 6-part series that will be consistent, and one of them is my face and also Stephen's face. I think we are the anchors of the process going forward. We'll be keeping on bringing in different experts, different co-creators around this process, but we are building blocks. The story will make sense by the 6th one, because we're trying to build blocks. We cannot have this discussion in one platform. Thank you so much, colleagues, for making your time. And we do apologize that we went 16 minutes over. I know the culprits, Belinda, we'll deal with them. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Muparutsa, and thank you so much to everybody who has managed to attend. Once again, if you go onto social media, we are trending with the hashtags towards an inclusive society, hashtag catalyzing vision 2030, hashtag Zim Vision 2030, and just Vision 2030. So you are welcome to tweet, retweet, anything that you've learned from today's session. Please feel free to share it on social media with your friends, your family members. And just as the bishop has said, we need to depoliticize this process. Our children have a vested interest in what happens in 10 years, and that depends on our involvement or lack of involvement. So this brings us to the end of our first dialogue in a series of 6. This was the need for a vision process. Next, our next dialogue is coming on the 6th of October at the same time, where we're going to be talking about and giving an overview of where Zimbabwe is today, looking at the economy, looking at Zimbabwe as a whole. Where are we at? If we're saying we want to get to Vision 2030, we need to be able to measure ourselves now and to pace ourselves to get to a certain place. So that's what we're going to be doing 2 weeks from now on the same platforms, Heart and Soul TV, Newsday Zimbabwe, and also on the CVO Institute Facebook page. There's also a link to that, which you can find. I think if you've registered for this, we'll be able to share those details with you via email. But thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and we hope to catch you 2 weeks from now. Have a good day.